So have you ever tried to compare two companies and suddenly realized, wait a minute, I'm staring at completely different data sets here? Honestly, it happens all the time, especially in the restaurant industry. Think about it. When we look at sustainability data, energy use, water consumption, labor practices, trying to compare a massive multinational franchise to a local regional chain is the ultimate apples to oranges dilemma. In this explainer, we're going to solve this exact problem. We'll look at how to standardize and normalize this data to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes.
To really get a feel for this challenge, I want you to imagine comparing the total energy consumption, or maybe the food waste, of two wildly different setups. Picture a massive global chain with, say, 10,000 locations on one hand, and a small regional chain with just 10 locations on the other. Obviously, if you only look at the raw numbers, the global chain's energy bill and waste output are going to look drastically, almost comically larger. It's literally like comparing the energy bill of a giant commercial factory to your home kitchen. But that leaves us right to the core of our problem. Since bigger chains inherently use way more resources just by virtue of existing at such a massive scale, how do we actually figure out who's being more efficient? How do we compare their sustainability records fairly without just penalizing a company simply because it's big? Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap to figure it all out. First, we'll look at the data comparison dilemma. Then we'll introduce activity metrics. Third, we'll talk about counting restaurants by ownership. After that, tracking employee headcounts. And finally, number 5, normalizing that data for a fair comparison.
Section 1, the data comparison dilemma. Why raw data is honestly pretty misleading. The reality here is that relying purely on raw numbers in sustainability reports can totally trick investors and stakeholders. Think about it. A company could make incredible, real strides in energy efficiency, but if they also open 500 new stores in a single year, their total energy use is inevitably still going to go up. To bring some actual transparency and comparability to this, frankly messy data, we rely on established frameworks like the SASB standards, which are now under the IFRS Foundation. Specifically, the SASB industry standard for restaurants gives companies a very precise set of rules on exactly how to report their sustainability-related financial information. This way, everybody is finally speaking the exact same language.
Section 2. Introducing activity metrics. This is the real solution to dealing with scale. Now, within that SASB framework we just mentioned, there's a specific type of data point designed exactly to fix this whole apples to oranges problem we've been talking about.
They are called activity metrics. The official definition, right on page 4 of the standards, says these are metrics which quantify the scale of specific activities or operations by an entity to normalize data and facilitate comparison. The absolute key word here is scale. By measuring the sheer size and scope of a company's day-to-day operations, we can completely level the playing field. It gives those giant raw sustainability numbers some much-needed context.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that the SASB standard doesn't just ask for some vague idea of generic scale. No, it prescribes 2 precise activity metrics specifically for the restaurant industry. You'll see metric FBRN-0000.A looks at the number of restaurants, and metric FBRN-0000.B looks at the number of employees. And notice how both of them demand a very specific split. You have to separate out entity-owned locations from franchise locations. Let's break down why that split matters so much.
Section 3. Counting restaurants by ownership. We're talking entity versus franchise. Let's look a little closer at the first of these 2 crucial metrics, which is tracking the sheer number of restaurant locations. So, metric FBRN-000.A requires companies to count their locations, but it strictly requires them to be split into 2 separate buckets. You've got entity-owned restaurants on one side and franchise restaurants on the other. Now, entity-owned simply means the parent corporation has direct, day-to-day operational control over that location. Franchise restaurants, on the other hand, are run by independent operators who essentially just license the brand name and the menu.
So why is this specific distinction absolutely critical for sustainability? Well, it clarifies the massive difference between having direct operational control versus just having indirect influence. Think about it this way. A corporate brand can easily mandate that all of its entity-owned stores install high-efficiency commercial ovens and LED lighting to cut down on energy use, right? They have that power. But franchisees? They're totally independent business owners paying their own utility bills. The parent company can definitely encourage them to go green, but it's way harder to actually force them to make that kind of capital expenditure.
By splitting the location count up like this, investors can clearly see exactly where a brand has the direct power to enforce environmental changes and where they only really have influence.
Section 4. Tracking employee headcounts. This brings in the human element. We're shifting our focus now from physical buildings and ovens over to the human side of the entire operation.
And that brings us to metric FBRN000.B. This one requires the brand to count the total number of employees. And just like with the physical locations, this requires a really strict separation. You have to track the headcount at entity-owned locations, completely separate from the headcount at franchise locations.
You see, the restaurant industry is famously labor-intensive, often serving as a massive entry point for young workers entering the workforce. Tracking the headcount this way completely normalizes critical labor data. For instance, the SASB standards also require reporting on things like voluntary and involuntary turnover rates, as well as the average hourly wage. By actually knowing that headcount split, we can properly contextualize those turnover rates. We can also measure a company's financial exposure to minimum wage changes happening across different regions. But maybe more importantly, this separates direct corporate HR policies from franchise employer practices. Legally speaking, franchisees act as totally independent employers. So if there are labor law violations or incredibly high turnover rates, this specific metric helps investors isolate exactly where that problem actually lives within the brand.
Section 5. Normalizing for fair comparison. Let's do the final math. This is our final step, putting all the raw sustainability data and these activity metrics together to actually do the normalization calculation. Okay, let's look at a number. 500,000 gigajoules. This is a massive, incredibly intimidating raw number for total energy consumed by a restaurant chain. If a company just hands you this number in a report, what do you even do with it? Is it good? Is it terrible? Who knows? On its own, without any context, it's essentially unhelpful for any kind of serious analysis.
So the crucial point is how we use the activity metric to fix this. It's actually a super simple three-step process. Step 1, you take the raw sustainability data, like that 500,000 gigajoules of total energy consumed. Step 2, you divide it by the appropriate activity metric, which in this case would be the total number of restaurants. And then step 3, you analyze the resulting intensity ratio. Now, instead of staring at a totally meaningless massive number, you're looking at energy consumed per restaurant. It's like magic. You've turned a raw, bulky impact number into an actionable, unit-level measure of efficiency.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why we do this. Notice how the scenario has completely flipped here. That massive global chain from the very beginning of our explainer, the one that used vastly more total energy overall, well, it actually turns out to be significantly more energy efficient per location than the much smaller regional chain. Without activity metrics, that global chain looked like a massive, heavy polluter. But with activity metrics, we can see they are actually running a much tighter, much more efficient ship at the unit level.
Ultimately, this is the entire goal of the SASB framework. As the standard itself reminds us, activity metrics exist to, quote, normalize data and facilitate comparison. They strip away the distortion of massive scale, and they clear up the confusion around different ownership models. This empowers corporate disclosure teams to tell the true, accurate story of their efficiency. And, on the flip side, it allows investors to make genuine, totally fair, apples-to-apples comparisons. So I'll leave you with this final, rather provocative thought to consider. If a restaurant brand isn't normalizing its sustainability data by carefully splitting out ownership and scale, what story are their raw numbers actually trying to tell? And honestly, more importantly, what story might they be hiding? Thanks for joining me on this explainer today, and I hope you never look at a raw sustainability metric exactly the same way again.